Hi, this is Andy Hoffman, Marketing Director of Miles Franklin Precious Metals in our 28th year in business. It's early morning, Wednesday, January 31st, 2017. And the title of this week's audio blog is All Out Currency and Trade Wars and a New World Order That Will Shock You. Actually, it's still Tuesday afternoon as I start scripting, as frankly, I simply could not wait until tomorrow morning to get started. To that end, as I typically tape audio blogs on Thursday, I'm a full 2 days early. I definitely won't finish scripting tonight, and frankly, with so much going on in the world, I'd rather wait to finish till tomorrow morning, i.e. just before the Federal Reserve's policy statement is released, which, although few people expect anything of it, has the potential to prove a major inflectionary point in monetary history, not just for the U.S., but the entire world. Yes, the endgame is so close now, it wouldn't take much to push the whole dying system over the edge, and nothing would please me more if Whirlybird Janet was the one to do it. Not that such a dramatic change is my base case scenario, mind you. However, the margin for error for someone with so much weight on her tiny shoulders has never been higher, and thus I look forward to her potential self-destruction at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time tomorrow. And if not then, sometime very shortly thereafter. To that end, I'll let you know when I'm done scripting for the evening, at which point I'll simply get some rest and start up again in the morning, knowing full well that as the aforementioned all-out currency and trade wars have started, it's only a matter of time before the first major bombshell is dropped. In Star Wars terms, it feels like the end of Episode 2, when Yoda says, "The shroud of the dark side has fallen. Begun, the Clone War has." So why am I so excited, you ask? When nothing but bad news surrounds us on every conceivable front, or better put, PM bullish, everything else bearish, with the caveat that in the shocking new world order that approaches, Bitcoin metals, twin destroyer of the fiat regime Bitcoin, will likely respond positively to the exact same things driving silver and gold, acting as not only a wealth storage ally, but a wingman taking the monetary heat off of gold and silver, as fearful governments, to use another Star Wars analogy, concentrate all firepower on what they will likely see, increasingly so, with each day, the greater monetary threat that decentralized cryptocurrency, i.e. Bitcoin, will likely be in a new world order that casts off the 1% in favor of the 99%. Well, I'm excited with quotes around it, as it's difficult to look forward to uncertain and likely dangerous times, because all I have fought for 15 years, 15 lonely years, is coming to fruition. And anyone who has been such a contrarian for as long as me, let alone one who has been serially punished for being serially right by a cabal of elite bankers and politicians, hell-bent at masking the rot they created with fraud, lies, and deceit, can understandably have a few hard feelings to vent, particularly when such venting helps others protect themselves, as I have done, to the jeers and scorn of essentially everyone I've encountered. Thank God I learned long ago to avoid speaking of such matters with friends and family, and equally thankfully that I have been blessed with a third career as rewarding as this, where the handful of truth-seeking realists in the world seek me out, providing not only the means to feed my family, but network with some of the world's brightest people. True, what's ahead for the world will be a terrifying wake-up call to billions of people who didn't understand, or in many cases even try to seek the truth. And for billions more, the same miserable existence that overpopulation, fiat currency, and draconian government has imposed on them for years, decades, or even centuries. However, when this generational change in the status quo is done, perhaps many years from now, those that protected themselves will be in a position to thrive, and even those that didn't, a fighting chance to improve themselves the good old-fashioned way. But for now, unfortunately, the name of the game will be survival, certainly financially, and in some cases, mortally too. In the past 2 days, I wrote of how ugly the post-inauguration period has become, in not even a week's time. I warned back this summer that a Trump victory, which I strongly believed would occur, would have Brexit times 10 ramifications, and frankly, even I am in awe by how dramatically Donald Trump has shaken the political, economic, social, and monetary landscape in such a short amount of time. As clearly, the politically careful candidate Trump, for lack of a better word, died last Friday in favor of the ruthless, no-holds-barred political atheist who is shaking the establishment to its core, making enemies at a breakneck pace whilst accumulating equally fervent supporters, in what shapes up to be a political and social polarization so violent it may well destroy the United States as we know it. To that end, it's no coincidence that California's smoldering secession movement, like those in Europe, is bursting to the surface, even if those running it are too stupid to realize that the financial basket case of California needs the federal government's printing press and implicit debt support far more than the nation's need a group than the nation needs a group of financially profligate socialists hell-bent on championing every terrible thing the Obama administration represented, including an open borders policy that has put America on the brink of bankruptcy, which undoubtedly Janet Yellen and friends will happily sign the papers for. There's so much to get to today, but I'm not going to reiterate what I discussed in this weekend's overwhelmed by PM bullish, everything else bearish news. Yesterday's A Nation and World Divided, and this morning's I Never Do This, the latter of which notes how I never feature the same topic 2 days in a row. But for this lone case, in which the shocking, draconian actions of Donald Trump's first week in office and the violent worldwide backlash it catalyzed were more worthy of discussion than all other topics combined. To that end, it was only a month ago when I first wrote, "Money printing and draconian government actions will define 2017. With just 1 month into the year, even I believe understates the ultimate chaotic potential. Let alone in the precious metals market I and Miles Franklin focus on, as we race closer to the historic physical shortages that must inevitably arrive, as foreshadowed by the similar but ultimately finite scarcity crises the industry endured in 2008, 11, 13, and 15. That said, even I am having trouble comprehending the mass resignations and layoffs in the State and Treasury departments as Obama administration holdovers all but mutiny against the Trump administration. This as Democratic congressmen literally boycotted the appointment hearings of Trump's cabinet nominees in response to draconian executive orders that, whether good or bad for the country, demonstrate a chilling, merciless, authoritative bent that threatens America's stability and diplomatic standing, as well as the all-out revolt of the technology industry, following rumors that Trump will end the H-1B visa program that has enabled them to cheaply outsource engineers from abroad, which, I might add, in a massive blow to the cashless society hopes of the world's worst person outside of Hillary Clinton and Recep Erdogan, Narendra Modi, will provide just as huge of a blow to the collapsing nation of India as Silicon Valley, now that its top jobs benefactor may be annihilated, which cumulatively will be like attaching a truckload of anvils onto the rapidly listing dollar, which unquestionably will lose a significant part of its reserve currency status by the time Trump's term is through, irrespective of what policies he enacts. As frankly, the global revolution against the Fed's hideous, inflation-exporting, nation-destroying policies may well be as intense and destructive as the revolutions against political leaders and unions. To that end, the dollar's massive, unprecedented overvaluation, like that of the PPT and Fed goose stock, bond, and real estate markets, was ready to fall hard no matter who became president, as at some point simply being more liquid than other fiat currencies is not attribute enough to save an intrinsically worthless piece of paper, particularly when its issuer must accelerate printing, issuance imminently, simply to avoid the all-out collapse its historic Ponzi scheme would endure if the proverbial foot were taken off the pedal for a mere millisecond. And did I mention the in-your-face trashing of the world's leading politicians, corporations, and organizations, breaking all known rules of diplomatic etiquette, at a time when political unions have never been more vulnerable, economic activity weaker, or increasingly unpayable debt obligations higher, which, as you can imagine, is being reciprocated tit for tat by none other than the leaders of nations as far-reaching and vital to America's best interests as Mexico, Germany, and China. Yes, I'd take Trump over Hillary 100 times out of 100, particularly given her insane, hell-bent goal of war with Russia. However, with each passing day, I fear more and more that Trump's brand of economic patriotism will be every bit as antagonistic to a far broader swath of the world's first, second, and third world nations. And the scariest thing of all is that no amount of bombs, tanks, and missiles, or tariffs, walls, or border-adjusted taxes can make America economically great again, now that the world has become a far more populous, competitive place. And oh yeah, America is not only history's largest creditor, but fiat currency printer as well. Of course, the race to the base, which I'll get to momentarily, is occurring simultaneously with the explosion of political and social insurgents that has already claimed numerous 1%-led governments, as in Brazil, the US, and the UK, whilst others like India and Turkey saw the desperate despots running them take extraordinary 99% destroying actions to preempt the inevitable by literally taking their nations back to the third world, likely for decades to come, simply to maintain the power that will inevitably be taken from them. And that goes for Greece too, which was betrayed by Syriza and its supposedly populist leader Alexis Tsipras, to the point that he has become persona non grata in the nation I for years predicted would provide the spark catalyzing the big one, which now, on the brink of economic, political, and social collapse, looks more likely than ever to spring Europe and for all intents and purposes, the Western banking system destroying Brexit that just a year and a half ago was considered a DEFCON 1 political and financial threat. Only now, it's not only Greece on the verge of political and economic collapse, but far larger European nations like Italy and France, not to mention Spain, which may see 25% of its population and tax base secede by year-end, and countless other borderline second and third world nations that were stupid enough to join history's most destructive political, economic, and monetary union since the Soviet Socialist Republic, which is exactly the direction the EU was headed until the people fought back. To that end, particularly now that her chief competitor, former Prime Minister François Fillon, has been completely disgraced by a hideous nepotism and embezzlement scandal, I don't see a chance in hell that Marine Le Pen loses the French presidential election in May. Likely after the even more anti-EU radical Geert Wilders wins the Dutch prime ministerial election in March, and just before the imminent Italian snap election, where a five-star movement candidate will likely win too, and ultimately the German elections in October, when Angela Merkel will be humiliated, likely by the violently anti-EU Alternative for Deutschland party. Here in the United States of economic collapse, what part of this week's horrifying, unexpected 10% plunge in new home sales says recovery to you? Or today's utterly shocking, catastrophic plunge in the Chicago PMI, nearly breaching the 50 level that connotes the difference between recession and expansion? Or the explosive growth of crude, gasoline, and distillates inventories and production as we inch closer and closer to the end game of not only OPEC's fraudulent production cut agreement, and for that matter OPEC itself, but countless hundreds, if not thousands, of teetering U.S. energy companies. I mean, this is already the third longest LOL expansion in U.S. history, featuring the lowest growth and the most debt accumulation ever, as well as zero real wage increases, the destruction of millions of high-paying full-time jobs in lieu of minimum wage-paying part-time gigs, the highest ever level of entitlements, and the lowest home ownership and labor participation in decades. Also an era where 60% of all Americans have less than $1,000 in savings, whilst the cost of living relentlessly skyrockets due to a combination of hyperinflationary money printing and excessive suffocating taxes and regulations, which I assure you Donald Trump cannot reverse without blowing the already exploding debts and deficits of the nanny state of America, which he has promised to maintain in full, to kingdom come. This, as the Fed, LOL, threatens to double LOL, raise rates 3 times this year, after spending 4 years lying about such policies, only to see the Fed funds rate still at 0.5% and its balance sheet of toxic, historically overvalued mortgage and treasury bonds that no one else wants still at $4.5 trillion. Not counting who knows how many trillions of stocks and other sundry junk that has been covertly monetized with its partners at the PPT and ESF in the name of maintaining said dying status quo. Thus, to Whirlybird Janet, Slimeball Fisher, Doofus Dudley, and the rest of the world-destroying Fed crew, I can only wish you the best of luck tomorrow in spewing, despite the help of more than 100 taxpayer-funded lackeys, a combination of monetary stupidity so blatant it transforms the inevitability of the Fed's demise to stark imminence. To that end, has anyone noticed how yet again, just as I did in early 2014 with my 3% enough said and 2.6% enough said articles, predicted the interest rate tops that had to occur to prevent all-out collapses, my 2.5% enough said article of 2 weeks ago looks very likely to be correct again, as this time the debt is much higher and the economy much weaker, to the point that quite soon I'll likely be writing 2.0% enough said and lower. That is, until the bond vigilantes do actually arrive, as ultimately they must, when the Fed and all central banks hyperinflate their currencies into oblivion. Which brings me to the first of the 2 provocative points in today's title, which I'll get to one at a time before concluding with an analysis of the precious metal markets. i.e., the all-out trade and currency wars Trump has incited, taking inexorable, irreversible trends that had been smoldering when history's largest, most destructive fiat currency scheme broke in 2008 and setting them on fire. Starting with last week's, as I put it in an article of that same name, thermonuclear currency war salvo, Trump and right-hand man Steve Mnuchin launched last week, in permanently ending the two-decade-old facade of America's fictional strong dollar policy, but not only saying the dollar was too strong, but that we are getting killed by the world's serial currency devaluers without naming specific names. An omission that, as of today, was made crystal clear when not only did both Trump and his top trade advisor Peter Navarro suggest China and Japan were serial devaluers, but blatantly accused the Germans of the same, claiming Germany uses a, quote, grossly undervalued euro to, quote, exploit the U.S. and its EU trade partners. In essence, calling the euro an implicit Deutschmark, and thus, the way I see it, suggesting the euro currency is nothing less than a vast German Ponzi scheme, hyperinflated into oblivion to destroy its so-called partners, from France to Italy to Greece. Which may not have been the euro's initial intention, as back in the late 90s it was nothing more than an ill-conceived, ill-begotten power play for Europe's 1%. But it certainly looks that way now, and frankly, I'd be shocked if it lasts another year or two. To that end, Trump's shocking but true accusations of Germany this morning, quite ironic as no one manipulates markets more than the U.S., is in my view an all-out declaration of economic war. This mere days after Trump accused Angela Merkel of causing the migration crisis enveloping most of Europe, not America, which bombed the Middle East into the Stone Age, and suggesting that she and other European leaders were not trustworthy. In response, Merkel attempted to be magnanimous, given that she has her own likely devastating election to lose this fall. However, the die is cast for U.S.-German relations, which likely will be no different than those with the U.S. and the vast majority of today's soon-to-collapse European establishment. Irrespective, the trade and currency wars he ignited today, not to mention in last week singling out BMW for not building cars in the United States, as if he has authority over German car makers, let alone U.S. ones, creates an eerily uncomfortable feeling, like the days of Germany being once again considered an arch-enemy may return. As I assure you, Germany, like Mexico, China, and all competing nations, will respond in kind, which only makes Trump's archaic economic nationalism appear that much more crazy, given that most of the nations he's attacking have superior cards in their hands, such as lower costs of production and/or superior financial conditions. However, the most terrifying aspect of all is that ultimately the currency wars Germany, Japan, and China have been playing must inevitably be joined by every nation not yet playing the game. As in the race to the base, the only way to LOL win is to destroy one's currency, as so many others have already. Which again, I cannot emphasize enough, is nothing but an economically illiterate exercise in self-destruction, perpetrated solely for political purposes and achieving nothing except hyperinflation, social unrest, and debt accumulation. Just take a look at how Japan is feared in destroying the yen for 2+ decades. Trust me, it's not a coincidence that since Abenomics started 4 years ago, not only has the yen been crushed, but the land of the setting sun, demographic hell, and nuclear radiation has seen its economy tank and its trade balance turn negative for the first time in decades. But alas, this is what bankers and politicians do when armed with the ultimate Ponzi-creating machine, the fiat currency printing press. For years, I predicted this would occur, just as it has hundreds, if not thousands of times throughout history, without exception. Only this time, the entire world is being hit by this nuclear tidal wave of monetary hell simultaneously, with nowhere to hide for the vast majority of the world's heavily overpopulated billions. And now that Trump has once and for all ended the facade of the 2-decade-old fraud of Robert Rubin's strong dollar policy, which in essence meant covertly selling off America's gold and so thoroughly naked shorting it, silver, and the mining shares, that production is doomed to collapse for the next decade at least. It's official game over for whatever fraudulent, propagandized credibility America ever had. Which, of course, the Fed must accede to by turning on its own doomsday weapon, the reserve currency issuing printing press, and setting it to levels above anything it, the ECB, the Bank of Japan, or the PBOC have yet dreamed of, lest America loses the aforementioned self-destructive final currency war by allowing the dollar to remain too strong to gain back the fictional jobs that can't return anyway, for countless reasons completely unrelated to the dollar's exchange rate. To that end, it was just 1 week ago, literally the day after Trump's initial too strong comment, that New York Fed President Bill Dudley, like Robert Rubin and Steve Mnuchin, a former Goldman Sachs partner, actually suggested Americans need to start cashing out their home equity a la 2004 to 2007. That is, those who still have equity after watching it be destroyed by such fiscal idiocy a decade ago. And how does one enable such self-destructive behavior, you ask? Well, that's an easy one. You print as many dollars as you can and use them to monetize every bond not nailed down, treasury, mortgage, or corporate, whilst naked shorting gold and silver, supporting Dow Jones propaganda average futures, and lying through your teeth about everything from employment to GDP to inflation, until rates are low enough to coerce moronic homeowners to cash out their remaining nest eggs to buy Chinese and Japanese manufactured goods. Well, at least that's been the plan of the past, which decidedly won't work this time, now that America is broke and the final currency war has gone thermonuclear. And through the ultimate monetary H-bomb the Fed is preparing, though the ultimate monetary H-bomb the Fed is preparing will not likely be launched tomorrow, you can bet that Trump, Janet Yellen, Steve Mnuchin, and whoever else is in a position to push the button will be doing so soon. At which point, precious metals will go no offer instantly, and my next day's article will be titled, Ding Dong, the Fed is Dead. Well, that's enough for today, in that I've typed nearly 6 pages atop the article I wrote this morning, let alone as it's nearly 9 p.m. and I haven't yet eaten dinner. I'll be back bright and early to finish, and what could be, like so many these days, an historic day. Okay, it's 4:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, and I'm up and at 'em. Shockingly, precious metals are not down overnight. Even if, of course, the cartel stopped their early attempts to rise with the prototypical cartel herald algorithm at exactly the 2:15 a.m. Eastern Standard Time open of the London paper pre-market trading session for the 780th time in the past 897 trading days. Actually, silver's up a tad, which is quite the small miracle considering the cartel's age-old rule that, quote, all great days, irrespective of how capped yesterday's impressive gains were compared to the unfettered further inflation of the base metal bubble, must be followed by horrible ones. Now, not to mention as today is also a Fed day, when even if these were normal times, gold would be smashed and stocks and bonds goosed, no matter what Maestro Greenspan, Helicopter Ben, or Whirlybird Janet said, even if they actually said the Fed has decided to sell stocks and bonds and buy gold. Of course, these are far but normal times, as not only is this the first post-Trump FOMC meeting, in which frankly it's difficult to determine if Janet Yellen's personal motivation is one of conciliation with or antagonism toward her new boss. And yes, I know the Fed is supposed to be LOL, an independent institution. Additionally, it couldn't be more obvious that the hard data representing real economic activity is in freefall, let alone the meaningless soft data like LOL, the soaring consumer confidence that is yet to translate into any actual business improvement. Heck, if yesterday's horrifying 50.3 print on the Chicago PMI is any indication, the post-Trump confidence honeymoon is over too, particularly after his shocking post-inauguration executive orders, which have prompted dozens of survey responders to cite fiscal policy uncertainty, which was already at an all-time high, as their number one economic risk factor. In fact, the gap between hard and soft economic data, as of yesterday, was at the highest level since 2011, just before the massive sovereign debt crisis and precious metal surge that nearly took down global financial markets for the count. In turn, prompting the PPT, Fed, and gold cartel to go all in on 24/7 market manipulation, and Mario Draghi to utter the infamous whatever it takes speech, which ultimately marked the beginning of the end of the euro. Moreover, with Trump, Steve Mnuchin, Peter Navarro, and Bill Dudley himself having strongly espoused in the past week that either the dollar is too strong or Americans need to start cashing out their home equity, it makes logical sense that the Fed would be excessively, perhaps unexpectedly, hawkish today, let alone as mortgage and refinancing applications have plunged to 2008's post-Lehman crisis lows, while December new home sales unexpectedly plunged 10+%. This just after the Case-Shiller Home Index in November, just before mortgage rates surged, hit an all-time high. As clearly the aforementioned 2.5% enough said economic line in the sand looms above, i.e. the level above which, on the benchmark 10-year yield, the U.S., and by proxy the entire global economy, collapses. And oh yeah, the only two significant overnight headlines are French market slump as Le Pen gains traction and Italy bond risk soars as 3-year highs as youth unemployment tops 40%. Certainly not the type of headlines that inspire central bankers to talk tough, particularly when the stock, bond, and real estate markets are not only at all-time high valuations, but the former has not even had a single 5% correction in nearly a year. And trust me, at this point in the game, if the PPT LOL lost control of the Dow propaganda average to the tune of even 5%, mass chaos would break out to the point that the inevitability of QE4 negative interest rate policy to prevent history's largest, most destructive fiat Ponzi from catastrophically, instantaneously collapsing would become decidedly imminent. Oh, and did I mention that just last week, the soon-to-collapse European Union released its new roadmap toward a cashless society, for anyone still thinking cash is the best place to hide from the hyperinflation soon to hit the first world, like it already has in the second and third worlds. And now for the second part of today's provocative title, regarding the shocking new world order that's coming. Frankly, I debated hard about titling it The End of Half the World's Jobs, but I didn't want to go to sound or to appear too sensationalistic or defeatist. However, I'm just as excited about discussing it as anything I've ever written of, given that it's a topic that longtime readers know I'm extremely interested in, which is the fact that 99% of the world has not a clue what direction it's headed, living in the past, in many cases the extreme past, whilst technology passes them by, leaving them vulnerable to financial destruction, not to mention depriving them of the ability to profit from rapidly changing trends, politically, economically, socially, and monetarily. To that end, I have long espoused my belief that the current education system is a diseased, inefficient, hyperinflated dinosaur of an institution, long ago commandeered by greedy crony capitalists, lobbyists, and the politicians they own. To that end, just watch the NIA's age-old college conspiracy documentary if you doubt what I say, or better yet, if you have older kids, consider if all the time and money wasted on college was worth it. Either way, education is but one issue that is changing so rapidly, it's inevitable that the status quo not only dramatically changes, but likely is completely destroyed. So again, I repeat to those parents, like myself with young children, please start to consider the fact that not only is college, university, or whatever they call it where you live, an unproductive use of time and money in nearly all cases, but an increasingly unlikely outcome for the vast majority of post-millennials, which frankly should at the least relieve you of the burden generations of parents up until the present have lived within the post-gold standard abandonment era, as saving for college has not only destroyed countless millions of families' budgets, but caused massive undue strain on family dynamics. And again, education is just one of many things that will completely and utterly change in the coming years, in many cases far sooner than you can imagine. To wit, the must-read article everyone listening to this must read, titled An Author's Look to the Future at Tesla.com. Yes, Tesla, the electric car maker, which I know extremely well from my prior life in the mining industry, in which, working at a company with a major cobalt discovery in Africa, cobalt is a major component of the lithium-ion batteries powering electric and hybrid cars, I regularly put Tesla cars on the front page of our investor presentations. The fact that my company blew $100 million of financing in 3 short years and went bankrupt is yet another happy mining industry story I witnessed. But that's another story for another day. Anyhow, self-interested or not, the article points out that technology is changing so rapidly, the world will not be recognizable in even a few years from where it is today. And I'm talking about essentially all aspects of life, from cars to real estate, insurance, education, and healthcare, to name but a few, to, of course, money. In other words, not only is it becoming mathematically unlikely that your children will attend college, but equally unlikely that they'll ever own a car or even a driver's license, as self-driving cars become ubiquitous parts of society. Or that we'll need to see doctors when we're modestly sick, now that medical tricorders a la Star Trek are being invented, and so on and so on. However, the part that interests me, as a monetary expert, the most, and likely as a reader of the Miles Franklin, interests you strongly as well, is the fact that money as we know it will likely be changed equally dramatically. To the point that, in my very strong view, it's unlikely my 5-year-old Sylvie will ever have a bank account or use cash for a transaction. And potentially, if the worst case scenario I envision plays out in the next decade, she may not even use dollars. Either way, what I have espoused for some time now, as in last May's Precious Metals and Bitcoin, twin destroyers of the fiat regime, and December's equally must-read Why Bitcoin Will Make Gold and Silver Go Up, I very strongly believe that before the aforementioned destruction of fiat currencies, which is ongoing as we speak, is even done, the world will embrace decentralized cryptocurrencies as the money of the future. Not that I'm endorsing speculation in Bitcoin, although long-time readers know full well that I have personally, but that in the post-fiat world, which in my view is very rapidly approaching, governments and their central banks, independent or otherwise, will never again be trusted as monetary stewards. That and the fact that cryptocurrencies will be far more efficient and cost-effective, more so than even credit cards. And of course, the archaic debit cards administered by increasingly obsolete and in many cases massively insolvent banks. As for precious metals, I've since my 2014 article, Is Gold Money? Who Cares? Article, doubted they'd play any material role in the future monetary realm, given that the exact same issues with fiat currency regimes. That is, that in order for a gold standard to be utilized, which in and of itself is practically illogical, if not impossible, one would have to trust that the administering government not only held the gold it claimed, but wasn't cheating on the standard by encumbering said gold, covertly selling it, or overprinting supposedly gold-backed currency. That said, the beauty of precious metals is that no matter how governments try to manipulate, as they have for centuries, if not millennia, they can't change its innate and steadily increasing intrinsic value, or for that matter prevent it from becoming more scarce or desirable as a storage of value. To that end, if the entire world switched to Bitcoin today for every day-to-day transaction, which may well occur 10 or 20 years from now, precious metals would still be the best way to store and pass down wealth in the known investment universe. True, Bitcoin and other, some yet to be invented, cryptocurrencies may also serve as digital gold in the coming futuristic world. And frankly, I would argue that this is already starting to occur, in small measure. However, per the Twin Destroyers title above, there's no mutual exclusivity required in the wealth storage universe, particularly as most people, like myself, like to diversify their holdings. To that end, while I personally hold a lot of Bitcoin, I hold a lot more physical gold and silver. The vast majority of which, I might add, is held at Miles Franklin's segregated storage facility with Brinks Montreal and private safe deposit box with Brinks Toronto. Frankly, particularly in light of the massive supply shortages I anticipate in the coming years, as billions of people seek to protect themselves from the endgame of hyperinflation most, if not all, central banks will inevitably engage in, I think the barbarous relics, gold and silver, and to a lesser extent platinum, will see inflows of old school capital, which frankly is the current school of wealth protection as well, like we haven't ever seen before. A very small portion will head into the future school asset Bitcoin as well, which at some point may well become, if what is written in the aforementioned article, and believed wholeheartedly by me, the current school as well. But irrespective, I cannot emphasize enough that precious metals and cryptocurrencies are natural allies in the relentless and eminently winnable fight against government monetary repression and destruction. And yet, whilst cryptocurrency has the potential to change the monetary world, which I believe will be the case, gold and silver will be one of the few last vestiges of the past to remain as relevant in the future as a means of wealth storage as it was in the Stone Age. And if you don't believe me, just follow the money, as today's already record-high gold and silver demand, amidst an environment of inexorably declining production and above-ground available-for-sale inventory, will only go stronger as the old paradigm of fiat currency dies, along with countless dozens of fiat currency regimes, from those managed by the Zimbabwe Central Bank all the way up to the Federal Reserve. To that end, the need to protect yourself from what's coming, financially and otherwise, has never been more urgent. And if your desired protection prescription is precious metals, we humbly ask you to call Miles Franklin at 800-822-8080 or go on to milesfranklin.com and register for online purchasing and give us a chance to earn your business. And as always, I can be reached via email at ahoffman@milesfranklin.com. Thanks very much. Fiat regime Bitcoin will likely respond positively to the exact same things driving silver and gold, acting as not only a wealth storage ally, but a wingman taking the monetary heat off of gold and silver, as fearful governments, to use another Star Wars analogy, concentrate all firepower on what they will likely see, increasingly so, with each day, the greater monetary threat that decentralized cryptocurrency, i.e. Bitcoin, will likely be in a new world order that casts off the 1% in favor of the 99%. Well, I'm excited with quotes around it, as it's difficult to look forward to uncertain and likely dangerous times, because all I have fought for 15 years, 15 lonely years, is coming to fruition. And anyone who has been such a contrarian for as long as me, let alone one who has been serially punished for being serially right by a cabal of elite bankers and politicians, hell-bent at masking the rot they created with fraud, lies, and deceit, can understandably have a few hard feelings to vent. Hi, this is Andy Hoffman, Marketing Director of Miles Franklin Precious Metals in our 28th year in business. It's early morning, Wednesday, January 31st, 2017. And the title of this week's audio blog is All Out Currency and Trade Wars and a New World Order That Will Shock You. Actually, it's still Tuesday afternoon as I start scripting, as frankly, I simply could not wait until tomorrow morning to get started. To that end, as I typically tape audio blogs on Thursday, I'm a full 2 days early. I definitely won't finish scripting tonight, and frankly, with so much going on in the world, I'd rather wait to finish till tomorrow morning, i.e. just before the Federal Reserve's policy statement is released, which, although few people expect anything of it, has the potential to prove a major inflectionary point in monetary history, not just for the U.S., but the entire world. Yes, the endgame is so close now, it wouldn't take much to push the whole dying system over the edge. And nothing would please me more if Whirlybird Janet was certainly financially, and in some cases, mortally too. In the past 2 days, I wrote of how ugly the post-inauguration period has become, in not even a week's time. I warned back this summer that a Trump victory, which I strongly believed would occur, would have Brexit times 10 ramifications. And frankly, even I am in awe by how dramatically Donald Trump has shaken the political, economic, social, and monetary landscape in such a short amount of time. As clearly, the politically careful candidate Trump, for lack of a better word, died last Friday in favor of the ruthless, no-holds-barred political atheist who is shaking the establishment to its core, making enemies at a breakneck pace whilst accumulating equally fervent supporters, in what shapes up to be a political and social polarization so violent it may well destroy the United States as we know it. To that end, it's no coincidence that California's smoldering secession movement, like those in Europe, is bursting to the surface, even if those running it are too stupid to realize that the financial basket case of California, particularly when such venting helps others protect themselves, as I have done, to the jeers and scorn of essentially everyone I've encountered. Thank God I learned long ago to avoid speaking of such matters with friends and family, and equally thankfully that I have been blessed with a third career as rewarding as this, where the handful of truth-seeking realists in the world seek me out, providing not only the means to feed my family, but network with some of the world's brightest people. True, what's ahead for the world will be a terrifying wake-up call to billions of people who didn't understand, or in many cases even try to seek the truth. And for billions more, the same miserable existence that overpopulation, fiat currency, and draconian government has imposed on them for years, decades, or even centuries. However, when this generational change in the status quo is done, perhaps many years from now, those that protected themselves will be in a position to thrive, and even those that didn't, a fighting chance to improve themselves the good old-fashioned way. But for now, unfortunately, the name of the game will be survival, the one to do it. Not that such a dramatic change is my base case scenario, mind you. However, the margin for error for someone with so much weight on her tiny shoulders has never been higher, and thus I look forward to her potential self-destruction at 2:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tomorrow. And if not then, sometime very shortly thereafter. To that end, I'll let you know when I'm done scripting for the evening, at which point I'll simply get some rest and start up again in the morning, knowing full well that as the aforementioned all-out currency and trade wars have started, it's only a matter of time before the first major bombshell is dropped. In Star Wars terms, it feels like the end of Episode 2, when Yoda says, "The shroud of the dark side has fallen. Begun, the Clone War has." So why am I so excited, you ask? When nothing but bad news surrounds us on every conceivable front, or better put, PM bullish, everything else bearish, with the caveat that in the shocking new world order that approaches, Bitcoin metals, twin destroyer of the